So, hello, and I'm joined today by Alistair. So, great to have you here. Alistair, please introduce yourself.
Morning. Yeah, thanks for having me, Rebecca. So you might pick up a bit of accent. So originally from New Zealand, but moved to the UK in 2002, but still managed to hang on to my accent somehow.
Nice. And yeah, could you just describe a little bit your role, your connection to financial services? It's where we met.
Yeah, sure. So my background, I qualified as an accountant, but only managed 6 months in an accounting firm, and then did various roles. So when I first got to London, I worked in, where was it? The Refugee Legal Centre, did a number of public sector roles, and then a TV production company, always within finance. Worked on productions like Super Nanny and Footballers' Wives, those sort of productions. Um, and then in 2007, I got my first role at banking, and that was at Goldman Sachs. So straight in at the deep end on daily reporting. So because of the US entities, it was often late nights, crunching numbers late into the night. So that was in at the deep end, but learned a lot there. And then after that, I worked at HSBC, and that's where we first met. So that was, I don't know, it was 2010, around that time.
Yeah, exactly. A little while ago now.
Yes, yes.
And yeah, it sounds like a few varieties of roles. And I had no idea about the footballers' wives connection either. Um,
Yeah, and actually, even with that, the same company, they made World's Toughest Tribes, where a bit like the trawler boats ones, and one of those was on the mines in Western Australia, which had been my previous role. So then, when I told our chiefs of our company that I'd worked in the mines, they were sort of bit let down about how tough these roles were as their accountant had worked there. So yeah, it's quite
Nice,
funny.
quite a variety.
Yes,
And particularly with finance roles and financial services in banks, there's lots of technical specifications and what the role is and the activities. But how did it look and how did it feel when you were in those roles in those large organizations?
yeah, and that's a good point. And even when I was thinking about this session, I was sort of reflecting on my career and different things, and almost the impression you have before you go to some of the big banks. I remember another Kiwi friend, I think he'd been working at Vodafone, he's reasonably clued on, and he's almost saying that don't expect to understand all of it. Like there's no way you can get your head around it, because they are so big and there's so many people there. And because I hadn't been in finance and I've been in, in banks, I'd been in different organisations, BBC and different ones, and I always had that impression that banks, from my dealing as a customer, I think, wow, they're so slick, everything runs like clockwork. And that was one thing that was sort of like popped that illusion once I had my first banking role, and you realise I've got the same challenges as every organisation. They'll have a rule change, you'll have to do something a bit manually rather than you haven't got a slick process all the time. And so that was sort of a good sort of learning point for me that there is a lot of scope to sort of improve things and just work through problems. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it's you were in the industry for a little while, and we met over 10 years ago, and it's been quite some evolutions during that time. So, just curious how you saw financial services or perhaps finance evolve over that time.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And then even just the way I worked as well, I was mostly a contractor. It's probably just the nature of, when you come over, you often do contracting work as a Kiwi or expat, which is good and bad in ways. The good part of it is that you get to work at different organisations, and so your sort of learning curve sort of gets steps up at times rather than just it's more of a gradual one, because you might be in at the deep end, and then when and each bank's different, and each area within a bank is so different as well. So you get that sort of luxury of taking the good bits from the previous roles and sort of thinking, oh, when I was in this role, we did this did it this way? Have you thought about doing that? And so just as my career's evolved, you're able to bring that into the roles. And then one thing, and probably just as my roles, I've got more exposure to outside vendors as well. I think that's something that's changing in banking. It's almost, I don't know if it's been forced to change or it's just, or they're realizing that they need to change. There's a lot more interaction with outside vendors and just, because maybe in the past, you're there, and so you don't get exposed to new ideas. So that's one thing that I like that changing in banking is you get a lot more moving around or exposure to different ideas from outside.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds very familiar. And you mentioned some of the good bits and taking that into different roles and different experiences. So yeah, curious, what are some of your takeaways, whether that's sort of good or bad or takeaways from that part of your career?
And I think it is important just to move around a bit. I know quite often different teams you'd be in, you'd have your grads that move around and they've come from Treasury or they've come from another team. And you see how beneficial that is. Like they get a different perspective on things as well. And they will have a network of people, which helps as well, because it's easy to get, everyone's busy in their roles, but it's easy to get siloed. You're just in your team and you don't really want to interact with other teams. And the interaction is important just to, often it's problem solving or you're trying to find out some information and you might have to go around the houses to find that information because people mightn't be incentivized to help, it's not really helping their day job. But I think that's one takeaway that I think is important for the banks to appreciate. I don't know how they can bring that in more where it's not just the grads that get that opportunity to move around. I think that's an important part in the financial services.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. And it's something I was lucky to experience and definitely took some positives away from that. And so that's a little bit about what you did. And I know you've made some changes and now you're outside of the big banks. So curious, what do you do now?
Yeah. And even that, when I look back at banking, I've still got lots of friends in banking and a lot of contacts there. And this opportunity came up through someone I'd worked with at Barclays, had been one of my stakeholders in a project I was running. And we always sort of got on well and sort of appreciated the work that each other did. And she had left banking in 2019, Leslie, and we'd sort of stayed in touch. And she was looking at doing her own thing, and then got into a incubator program with Porsche Digital in Berlin. So it's a program where, and you'll see lots of organizations do it, where they look to collaborate with startups or people that have got an idea. So you'll have the incubator stage where it is just at that idea stage. So it's quite early. And she had got traction on that and got onto this sort of well-recognized program. And she'd got in touch with me thinking my skill sets would be suitable for what they needed in the team. So it's a fintech startup called Impact, and within that there's three co-founders. I'm one of them, so I wear the COO hat. So the titles are reasonably loose at that early stage. So Leslie's the CEO, so she's out there pitching. I'm the COO, so I get to do a bit of Excel and crunching and financial models. And then we've got our CTO as well, who's very good on the technical side. So I've had 3 years of that. And like I was talking about with the other roles where I've done steps up, this has just been a massive jump as well in terms of the breadth of exposure that you get just to everything really. Like it brings my role a lot more into everyday life as well. If I'm reading an article or I get an ad pop up or I'm using an app on my phone and I think, why did they put that button there? What are they trying to do? versus sometimes in my previous role, it was very much work over here and then my everyday life over here. But now it's a lot more merged, which has its pros and cons, obviously. Sometimes you need to make sure you switch off. But yeah, definitely an interesting experience and learning a lot.
Yeah, and maybe it'd just be interesting. I think you had a change in location as well, and maybe just to hear a little bit more about Hume Impact.
Yeah. So change in location, and that was a bit more abrupt and a bit more permanent than I'd planned just due to COVID. I'm sure there's lots of people who experience that as well. So it was in March 2020 when this incubator program started, and so I'd need to be on site in Berlin for that. So I was going to a shared space a couple of times a week, go there, eat your pizza with everyone else, and sort of have your hoodie on and live the startup life. So there's a real sort of culture shock change there. And then I was due to go back and forth to London, but due to lockdown, I sort of ended up permanently in Berlin. So luckily enough, I had a friend that was able to pack up my flat in London, and then I've been here ever since. So yeah, and then because there's so many things changing at once, it makes it harder to pinpoint one thing that's creating the change, or because I had a change in location, obviously, and my German, I don't speak German, still pretty rubbish on my German. And then you had COVID, or you had the lockdown restrictions as well. So I'm almost curious what my experience would have been like in London with the lockdown. Well, I can't attribute all my change to the fact I'm here. It's just so many things changed at once. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I can share that feeling, changing location and role and moving somewhat out of the industry at that time. It was just a lot.
Yeah, because
Similar.
I had a little bit of experience of working from home. I remember maybe when we overlapped at HSBC, they were pushing twice a week, maybe working from home. So there'd been periods where I'd done some working from home, but then when you're working from home doing your own thing and you haven't got your boss that's wanting to review some report every couple of hours or something, you got different motivations to keep you honest and keep you focused.
Yeah, for sure. And it sounds like lots of learnings from the bank. So again, curious with some of those learnings, that experience from financial services, how that helps you now. And again, perhaps it's interesting to hear a little bit more about Hume Impact.
Yeah, because even thinking back to when I made the move, I remember my American upstairs neighbours when I was moving out, he's going, "Oh, you obviously did all your due diligence on the company and everything and crunched the numbers." And I was sort of like, no, not really. It was probably more a gut decision on that perspective. Obviously, you weighed up lots of things and, obviously you just didn't think about it at all. But with some of the startups, and I realize it more and more as I pull financial models together and projections for 5 years of turnover, there is a lot of estimates that have to go into it. And at that stage, a lot of it was based on the team that I had. I knew Leslie, my co-founder, and then the other co-founder as well had spoken, and the team was so important at that stage. So that was something that, that's what made the decision easy. And then even when I look back at the banking roles, I think a lot of it that I've had from that is when I go out in the startup world, I'm one of the more senior ones, not in terms of experience, but in terms of years on earth. And then I wonder how some of these young ones do it, which I think is good and bad. Like I think that they're like fearless with some of the things that they do, but then I think you see with some of the startups as they grow, they're not used to working in teams and they're not used to that structure. Which is necessary as you grow, and you've got to work with other teams and things. And that's definitely something from the bank that you get. You do have to work a lot with other teams in other areas, and they're not always, even though you've got the same ultimate boss, you do have to sort of influence people and sort of work with people, people that might be a bit prickly at times for whatever reason. They've got a lot on their plate as well, and you're trying to put some more work on them or get information from them. So definitely from banking, you get a lot of stakeholder experience, I think. And then the other thing is, I'm still in the finance world, so that experience is looked on very favourably when we're talking with other organisations. They sort of respect that experience that you've got on your CV, and they sort of know that you can work in that environment, and it is high pressure in lots of those roles as well. You sort of have, some quite demanding stakeholders, so you get all those sort of good skills that sort of set you up well. It's almost like fitness training, like when you're running or doing anything, you sort of got to build it up as well. So by starting in the bank, and you might have a more junior role at the start, and you think, oh well, what am I doing here? But you are sort of learning by doing, and then you get more exposure, get used to dealing with more senior stakeholders within the company, and so that's definitely sort of set me up well for when we're having calls with VCs or different people. Yeah. And even actually just thinking back to one of the startup events we went to in Dubai, we'd gone to someone and we'd seen a pretty dry talk about financial regulation or something, but they had some quite good food there. So we'd grab some food and we thought, we'll stick around for this next person that was talking. And normally the talk's only half an hour, and this guy's like an hour and a half. Oh no, what have we got ourselves into? But it's a guy, Chris Voss, who's worth looking up if people aren't familiar with him. He's a ex-FBI negotiator, and he's moved into the corporate world. But he had some really good points around teamwork and dealing with people. There's a few things I took away, but one of them was around sort of tactical empathy, he called it. So it's not trying to be sneaky or anything, but it was just when you're dealing with others, being able to empathise with their situation as well. And I think from working in the bank, the sort of issues that they're dealing with or why they might be reacting in certain ways. And that sort of sets you up well for when you're talking with them, not necessarily what buttons to push, but what concerns they might have as well. So that banking experience definitely helps there. Yeah.
Yes, super interesting. I'll check it out. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was really good. And some simple examples. And one thing he's talking about was, like, I think he was flying somewhere and he wanted to get an upgrade. And it was just like how you phrase things. And he was saying to the person that's probably not the senior person that's on the booth that could give you the upgrade. And it was more phrasing it like, how much trouble would you get in if you gave me an upgrade? So they empathize with what's running through their head rather than just straight to them like, can you give me an upgrade? Putting them on the spot, more empathizing with what decision they're having to go through as well. So it's little snippets like that which you sort of take away and realize you can bring into your sort of everyday roles as well.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. I'll remember that if I'm on a flight again sometime. And,
I haven't tried it yet. None of my airlines have business class normally. So,
particularly flying for a long trip to New Zealand, I can imagine.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then final question, thinking about what you do now and you're with You Impact in Berlin at a startup and looking at what you did in the past, if you could go back and give yourself some advice, what would you say?
Yeah, it's a good one. Like when I look back at my career, it's like there haven't been too many missteps in it. I think there's some roles, I might think I was probably plateauing a bit in that role or didn't get enough out of that, but all of them you do learn from. And then particularly some of the projects that might have gone badly, I learned a lot more on those. It's sort of like, yeah, that's why I need those controls in place. That's why I need to talk to the business users up front rather than just dealing with the IT team or whatever the particular thing is. You almost learn more from the mistakes. But one thing I do think about is, and I think I think it was probably always available, even back when I was starting. Now that I'm in the startup world, you realize how many resources are out there, like meetups, different groups where you can sort of learn outside your day job as well. Like you can sort of keep learning on those little bits as well. So I wish I'd probably done a bit more of that as I've gone along, sort of dipping into different things, not necessarily a massive time commitment or anything, but there's a lot of free resources out there and a lot of people that want to collaborate or that you can sort of bounce ideas off or learn from. So I think I'd feel like I'd missed out on doing a bit of that earlier on, definitely. I know there's a lot more of it now in podcasts and such as well, but I definitely know there would have been things like that available when I was out there.
Great. Well, thank you. That's it for today. Any final remarks? And from me, I'd just like to say a thank you.
No problem. Oh, and actually, sorry, one thing I realised I probably didn't talk enough about you impact. So what we do, I can give you a little bit on what, and even the sort of skills that I've used going through. So there's three of us co-founders, and I gave a little bit of background on our different experiences. So I sort of worked in reporting, and then transitioned into being a project manager or doing business analyst role. And what I like doing is delivering a product for end users. Like I've been an end user, I've worked with some good systems and I've worked with some not so good systems. And so my sort of motivation is to deliver something that's good for end users, and it's got to work well. And if it doesn't, you need the ability to learn from it and change it. So that's definitely something I sort of took away from my banking and have brought into this role. So in terms of what our company's done, so we build software for banks and fund distributors. So we deal with them as our clients. We're B2B to C. So the people that would be paying us would be the bank, and then they'd be putting our product in front of end users, so everyday retail investors. So our motivation was from being in banking, and because I'm so used to Excel and things, I'm happy looking at numbers and graphs. But you realise that not most people are. Most people are, they're used to their interfaces like Netflix or shopping on Amazon. So we wanted to make it as easy as that for people if they want to invest in sustainable funds. You want to get that transparency, and you don't want the less financially oriented people getting put off by horrible interfaces and graphs. So we've built a product, talked with lots of users, and see what they're more comfortable with, and that's what's evolved for our product. So we help banks convert their retail investors, and then we're also working with a behavioural scientist. So our product sort of monitors what people do, and then learns from it and can help sort of empower them. So if they're not so strong on the finance side, I'll get some nudges around, do you know this about, on the finance side, and then also on the sustainability side as well. So so that's where we're at the moment. So we've got our first client, and then we're also talking with some of the big banks and then different fund distributors. In terms of that journey, the role I've played is quite often dealing with lots of data. So the time from dealing with data at banks, and I've sort of got that rigor in dealing with the numbers. Still like a good reconciliation or something like that. You've got those controls and everything that you can put into place. And then I've used my PM skills. We work with developers from North Macedonia, and so we had to deal with them. And that was similar to in banks where you've got your, depending on your structure, you've got your development team, which could be offshore. So that was a similar skill to what I'd used in banks, where, you're setting out, you've got your timelines, you've got your issues, you've got your change management that's going on. So a lot of the skills that I'd used in banking was used there. It's just a bit different when it's your money that's going out the door versus the bank's money. So that was definitely something that's slightly different on it. And then the other bit is just now we're selling the product. You're dealing with people that might have been your bosses in banks. You're coming in selling them something. So yeah, that's an interesting perspective as well.
Yeah,
So yeah,
sure.
that's a little bit on you impact. So I just thought I'd slip that in there anyway.
Yeah, thank you. And I like that. It's the Netflix of sustainable investing. It sounds super interesting.
Yeah, yeah, because you realise when you look out there, it is quite hard still to invest sometimes. Or people, we spoke with users and they're doing it. Why'd you invest in that one? Oh, it's called ESG, or it's called green, or it's called sustainable. It's sort of like, I'm sure we can do better. And it is still evolving, the sustainability data. And I think from talking with yourself and some of the courses I've done, they talk about how the accounting system and standards are taking hundreds of years to evolve. This is sustainability data is still in the, still working on all fours. It's still early days, so there's definitely a lot of scope in this area.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing about your journey and about you Impact too. Really appreciate the time. And yeah, take care of yourself, Alistair.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Cheers.